On the pasuk Vayehi ben Soya ha'oroin Vayomer Moshe Kumo Hashem v'yafutzu eivecha v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha. So as the Orin traveled, Moshe said, "Rise, Hashem, your enemies should scatter, and those that hate you should run away, should flee from before you." Rashi explains, "V'yafutzu eivecha," your enemies should scatter, refers to hamechunasin, those that are gathered together. So they should scatter. V'yanusu misanecha, and those that hate you should flee. Elu haroit, from those that are, it refers to those that are pursuing you. So simply we understand the Rashi as meaning. Rashi is coming to deal with what seems to be the double expression in the pasuk. V'yafutzu oivecha, your enemies should scatter. V'yanusu misanecha, those that hate you should flee. So Rashi is explaining that we're speaking about two different categories. V'yafutzu oivecha is referring to those enemies that are gathered together. And that's why what's going to happen is the opposite of that. V'yafutzu oivecha, they're going to scatter. And v'yanusu misanecha is referring to those that are chasing, that are pursuing the Yidden. And instead of the fact that they were chasing after the Yidden, now they are going to be the ones fleeing and escaping. V'yanusu misanecha. However, there's a very obvious diuk, a very obvious, in Rashi's choice of words, a very obvious thing that's going on over here. In Rashi's choice of words is that by yafutzu eivecha, on those first words, v'yafutzu eivecha, Rashi says hamichunasin. It just says those that are gathered together. By v'yanusu misanecha, Rashi adds the words elu haroitfim. These are referring to elu. These are haroitfim, those that pursue you. So the Rebbe says we need to understand why is Rashi adding this word elu. The diuk becomes even stronger because the source of Rashi is in the Sifri, and there the term elu is used in both cases. First, elu hamechunasin, this refers to those that are gathered together, and then elu haroitfim. And Rashi changes from the words of the Sifri that by the first time, by oivecha, he leaves out the word elu, and by misanecha, he quotes this word elu as well. The Rebbe now moves on to the next part of Rashi. Rashi quotes again the word misanecha, and he explains, what does misanecha mean? These are the people that hate the Yidden, because anyone that hates Yidden is hating also as Misha Omar V'Hoyo Olam. He hates Hashem, the one who with his words created the world. Rashi brings a proof, Shanamar, as the pasuk says, Misanecha, those that hate you, Nasu Roish, had raised their heads. Who is this referring to? The pasuk goes on to say, Al Amcha Yarimusoid, those that are plotting secretly against your people. So here we see this idea that those that plot against the Yidden are called those that hate Hashem. Now simply what Rashi is coming to explain over here is, since the pasuk is speaking about those that are waging war against Yidden, so why would the pasuk be saying misanecha, that it's Hashem's enemies, your enemies, referring to Hashem's enemies? And this is why Rashi explains, because anyone that hates Yidden is actually hating es Misha Amar V'Hoyo Olam, he's hating Hashem. But the question is, this very question should have already arose on the first words, V'yafutzu oivecha. Before speaking about v'yanusu misanecha, the word oivecha also means your enemies. So why is Rashi only explaining this on the words v'yanusu misanecha? So there are mefarshim that explain that since the pasuk that Rashi brings as a proof that those that hate Hashem, hate the Yidden hate Hashem, so the pasuk over there uses the pasuk, the proof that's going to be used is going to be on the word misanecha. This is why Rashi tells it to us on the words of our pasuk, v'yanusu misanecha, and not on the word oivecha, because according to these mefarshim, as they say it there in that pasuk, oivim is not discussed. But the Rebbe says this answer is very problematic. It's tzorech iyun gadol, because the very same pasuk before those words misanecha nasu roish actually does deal with the oivim. The pasuk says, "Ki hine oivecha," your enemies, again referring to Hashem's enemies, yehemoyun, which means they're making a big commotion. And there specifically, so that we see clearly over there as well, that the same pasuk that's speaking about al amcha yarimu soid, that those that are plotting against the Yidden are called not only misanecha, but they're also called oivecha. Furthermore, very similar to what Rashi says over here, that Soine Yisrael, those that hate the Yidden, are called misanecha, those that hate Hashem. Rashi had actually told us something very similar to this already earlier on the pasuk Taharois Komecha, that you should destroy those that get up against you. This is in the Shiras Hayam in Oz Yosher in Parshas Beshalach. So Rashi says, what does Komecha mean? Who is the ones that stand up against Hashem? It refers to those that stand up against the Yidden. And in fact, the Rashi over there brings the proof, the pasuk that we just mentioned, V'cheinu Oimer, and he mentions not the point of Misanecha Nosu Roish, which is what Rashi brings over here, the part about those that hate you, but actually he brings the beginning of the pasuk, Ki hine oivecha yehemoyun, that your enemies, Hashem, are the ones that are making a big commotion. And what is this commotion? What are they doing? Al amcha ya'arimu soid. So he brings the same point. And this is why they're called, Rashi says, oivav, that's why they're called the enemies of Hashem. So we see clearly that Rashi is using that pasuk and also to say that the Yidden, that the goyim that hate the Yidden, are the enemies of the Yidden, are called the oivim of Hashem. And yet in our pasuk, Rashi does not deal with this when it says oivecha, but rather waits till the word misanecha. Says the Rebbe, there are other mefarshim that explain it in the following way. Oivecha, the word oivecha, your enemies, could be actually translated as it means not those that are the enemies of Hashem, but the opposite way. It means those that Hashem hates them. They're Hashem's enemies. In other words, that Hashem hates them. Whereas the word misanecha, as opposed to soinecha, cannot be translated any other way other than those that hate you. And this is why Rashi needs to explain over here that misanecha refers to those that hate the Yidden. And therefore, those that hate the Yidden is also considered that they hate Hashem. But the Rebbe says this answer is also not understood. Because in addition to the main point, which is, since Rashi had earlier already told us, that means again in Oz Yosher, that those that al amcha yarimu soid, those that plot against the Yidden, are considered the enemies of Hashem, because those that get up against the Yidden, those that rise against the Yidden, as Rashi puts it over there, are rising against Hashem, just like by misanecha, and therefore once Rashi told it to us back there already, so there's no reason why we would think in our case bedoichik to say that oivecha means those that Hashem hates, those that are Hashem's enemies means that Hashem hates. Why would we even think so? But in addition to all of this, if we look at the general context of our psukim over here, according to Rashi, it's quite obvious that oivecha, just like misanecha, means, the pasuk clearly means those that hate the Yidden. And their hatred is expressed in the fact, what's this psukim talking about? The fact that they're waging war against the Yidden. As it says right before this, Va'aroin bris Hashem, they say Aleph name that the Aroin of Hashem is traveling in front of them. As Rashi explains that this is the Aroin that's going out to war with the Yidden. In continuation to this, the pasuk says, Vayehi ben Sayorin, as the Aroin travels. So the pasuk says, V'yafutzu oivecha, which Rashi translated as those that are gathered, and V'yanusu misanecha, those that are pursuing you. So therefore, clearly there's no room to even think that the translation over here of Yafutzu Oivecha would mean those that Hashem hates. So we're back to the same question. Why is Rashi not translating Oivecha and only translating Misanecha as meaning that because the Yidden, they hate the Yidden, it means they hate Hashem? And therefore the Rebbe says we must say that the reason why Rashi doesn't translate or explain anything on Oivecha over here is actually because he's relying on that previous explanation in Oz Yosher, where he said Taharois Komecha, and he said clearly that those that plot against the Yidden are considered the enemies of Hashem. And that's why Rashi doesn't have to explain it over here. But if that's the case, now the question becomes the other way around. If we don't need an explanation for Oivecha, then why is it that by Misanecha we do need an explanation? Why can't Rashi rely here as well that we'll understand this from this previous Pirush? Why does Rashi need to repeat it again? The Rebbe now says there's also some other diyukim in the wording of Rashi, especially when we compare it to that Rashi in Oz Yasher on Taharis Kamecha. So to mention a few. Number one, why is Rashi emphasizing over here his wording? He says anyone that hates the Yidden is hating as Misha Omar V'Oyolam, the one who with his words created the world. He said the words, and with his words the world came into being. Why doesn't he just say simply Soine as HaKadosh Baruch Hu or Soine as HaMakoim? Why this expression as Misha Omar V'Oyolam? Question number two. In his Pirush in Oz Yasher, that is on Taharis Kamecha, Rashi seems to elaborate. He says extra words. He says, who are the ones that stand up against them? And then he goes on to explain those that stand up against the Yidden, etc. As opposed to here in our Rashi, he doesn't start off with this question, who are the enemies? He just says immediately, Misanecha, who are Misanecha, those that hate you? Elu, these are Soini Yisrael, those that hate the Yidden. Point number three. Again, back in Oz Yasher, when Rashi brings the pasuk over there from Kihine Oivecha Yehamoyun, Rashi uses the expression, he says, V'chein hu oimer, and so too, the pasuk says, etc. Here he uses the term shene'emar. And finally, the Rebbe says, by explaining the proof, so over here Rashi says, Misanecha nasu roish, umihem, and who are they? Who are these ones that hate you, that lifted their heads? Al amcha yarimusoid, those that are plotting against your nation. In other words, the question is, who is the one that hates Hashem? Whereas over there, back in Oz Yashir, Rashi first of all says, that your enemies are the ones that are making all of this commotion, etc. And what is the commotion about? Al amcha yarimusoid. In other words, the question is not who are the enemies, it's rather what is the commotion or what is the trouble that these enemies are doing. And number two, Rashi over there also concludes that because of this commotion that they're making, that's why so then they're called the enemies of Hashem. So Rashi seems to be doing something there very different to the way he words it over here. Says the Rebbe, the explanation of all of this will be understood by first understanding and prefacing that in the expression of Rashi in our Parsha, there's a major change compared to the wording in the Sifri, which is the source for Rashi. And that is, in the Sifri it says, anyone that hates the Yidden, ki'ilu, it's as if he hates, as Misha Amar V'Oyolam, Hashem who created the world. Rashi omits the word ki'ilu. Rashi says, Kol ha-soine es Yisrael, anyone that hates Hashem, soine, he hates, as Misha Amar V'Oyolam, without saying that ki'ilu. He hates Hashem. That means, Rashi learns that when the pasuk says misanecha, it's not only saying that it's as serious and as severe as the sin of hating Hashem, and therefore a punishment as severe as hating Hashem. So hating the Yidden is similar to hating Hashem. Rather, misanecha is to be taken literally, that they actually hate Hashem. It's this one and the same thing. Or to put it slightly different, someone that's Soine Yisrael, he's hating the Yidden, is because he hates Hashem. Similarly, when we look at Rashi back in Oz Yasher on Taharis Kamecha, there too we see a similar idea. Rashi says, who are the ones that stand up against Hashem? These are the ones that stand up against the Yidden. Not like in the Mechilta, where there it says, anyone that stands up against the Yidden, ki'ilu, it's as if he's standing up against Hashem. Because once again, according to Rashi, it's one and the same thing. Yidden know that the Goyim know that the Yidden are Hashem's special treasure from amongst all the nations. The Goyim know that B'ni B'chayri Yisrael, that the Yidden are Hashem's children. And therefore, for the Goyim, it's one and the same thing. By standing up against the Hashem, automatically they're standing up against the Yidden. Because the Yidden are Hashem's Am Segula. However, says the Rebbe, in the strength and the way and the intensity of the hate, in this itself, there's actually a difference between oivecha, those that are the enemies of Hashem, or in the words of Oz Yashir, kamecha, those that stand up against you, and the second word that we have in our parsha, misanecha, those that hate you. And it's for this reason that Rashi cannot rely on the Yanusu misanecha on that which he had explained already in Oz Yashir on the words Taris Kamecha, because from the fact that we find that the Goyim could be Kamecha standing up against Hashem, or Oivecha, they could be the enemies of Hashem, because they are standing up against the Yidden, and Al Amcha Yarimu Soy, because they're plotting against the Yidden, that's still no proof that you can actually refer to the Goyim also as Misanecha, that they hate Hashem. That they hate it to the Yidden is also a sign that they hate Hashem. Because, says the Rebbe, the word Soine, to actually hate, represents a much, much deeper type of hate than the Oyev, than just calling someone an enemy or Kamecha, someone rising up against the Yidden or against Hashem. And this term of Soine, this hate that we're speaking about, seemingly can't even apply when we're speaking about Hashem, as we'll soon discuss. And that's why Rashi needs to bring now a proof of this idea as well, that this too applies, by Sino as well. How do we understand this? Says the Rebbe, the difference between Oyev and Soine, when clearly the Pasuk is using both, and we're trying to say that each one means something else, because sometimes they could be interchangeable, as the Rebbe puts down in the footnote. But when you have both expressions next to each other, and each one means something else, so the difference between them is that Oyev is referring to someone that the sin of the hate is primarily more of an external type of sinner. It's more in a revealed way. It's a sinner that's more connected with some action, a practical thing. In other words, you're acting to the other person in a way of hate. Whereas the word soine is primarily a sinner, as a midah, as a deep emotion of the heart. A very, very deep hatred. The sinner to the other person is like engraved deeply in the person's heart. And therefore, says the Rebbe, in this case, what we're speaking about is not someone that's only trying to act in an evil way, in a bad way, to the other person when he has a chance to do so, but we're speaking about someone that's mamish into it, looking constantly for ways of how to do evil, how to do terrible things to the other person. The Rebbe uses as an example where we see this idea in reference to Soine. So the Rebbe brings the pasuk where we're speaking about someone that killed someone by mistake, and how the pasuk describes it is we're speaking about someone who loy Soine loy mitmoil shulshem. We're not speaking about someone that was a Soine from yesterday and the day before. In other words, a sinner mitmoil shulshem, a Soine is someone that's from yesterday and the day before, or someone that's constantly looking to try to harm the other person. That's called a soine. Says the Rebbe, this will also explain to us why in the teichach and the rebuke and the harsh psukim in Parshas Bechukoisai and the curses, the Torah we see in one pasuk uses also both of these expressions. The pasuk says, "V'nigaftem lefnei oivechem," you will be struck down in front of your enemies. "V'radu v'ochem soinechem," and those that hate you will rule over you. Rashi over there explains, V'nigaftem lefnei oivechem refers to those that are your enemies surrounding you from the outside. V'radu v'ochem soinechem, those that hate you will rule over you, means those that are searching after your treasures, looking inside, etc. In other words, an oyev is the oyev that's not the soine. We're speaking about a person we're only speaking about a revealed hatred. And therefore, it's possible that it's the sin of the hate, this hate that's happening by this person, is possible that he's only trying to protect himself, that the other person shouldn't harm him, and therefore he's, as Rashi says, surrounding on the outside. That's what the oyev, the enemy, is. In other words, it's someone that is just the expression of hate, but not necessarily a deep-seated, deep-rooted hate. Whereas a soine, by this person, we have a person that has a pent-up hate inside of him. And he's looking to try to pursue the other person, to chase after the other person, to destroy the other person. And that's why these Soidim are not only surrounding on the outside, but machapsim, they're looking for these people's treasures, looking inside, looking to go after them, etc., etc. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand the difference in Rashi's wording in our pasuk, v'yafutzu oivecha, ha'mechunasin, and v'yanusu misanecha. Rashi says, Elu haroitzim, which was our original question in our Sicha. Why the expression Elu? Says the Rebbe, the fact that v'yafutzu oivecha, that your enemies will scatter, is referring to those that are gathered together, is not connected to the term oivecha, to the title, to this word oivecha. In other words, it's not because they are called oivecha, automatically it means they're gathered together. Because clearly there could be many different ways how the enemies can wage war. Sometimes it might be better for them when they're gathered together as a group, and sometimes because of tactics of war, sometimes they will split up and divide into various different groups. And therefore Rashi can't say v'yafutzu oivecha elu hamichunasim, that automatically oivecha means is a reference always to people that are gathered together. Rather, Rashi says v'yafutzu oivecha, your enemies will scatter, hamichunasim, those that are gathered. Meaning to say, from the fact that the pasuk is saying v'yafutzu, they'll scatter, we understand that in this particular case we're speaking about enemies that were gathered. So now they're going to be scattered. Whereas when it says v'yanusu misanecha, regards to the term soinim, Rashi says elu haroitfim. What does it mean elu haroitfim? That misanecha, those that hate you, automatically is connected with the idea of chasing after someone, pursuing someone. In other words, roitfim is not only the opposite of v'yanusu. We say, because they were chasing after you, now they're going to run away. But really, this is the very translation of the word misanecha. Misanecha elu haroitfim. Meaning to say, we're speaking about people that they have this sin or this hate in their heart, and therefore they're constantly running, chasing after the Yidden, always looking to harm the Yidden. Says the Rebbe, once we explained, v'yanusu misanecha elu haroitfim, in other words, we're speaking about people that have a very, very deep hate to the Yidden, and therefore they're constantly pursuing them. This is now what brings the question in Rashi. How can we say misanecha when we're speaking about Hashem? That a human being should have such a pent-up hate to Hashem, and furthermore, this expression of roitfim, they're chasing, they're pursuing. And the question is, when we speak about the word oivecha, the enemy, which as we said, it's more referring to when someone has a more revealed type of hate, which is more action-based, hanhaga b'poel, just the way he acts that way. And certainly the word in Oz Yosher, those kamecha that stand up against you, was speaking about an actual doing something, an action against Hashem. Says that Rebbe, this could be understood. Sometimes a person has a desire to do something that's opposite of the Ratzon Hashem, and he can't control himself, or he doesn't want to control himself, so he rebels against Hashem. He's doing opposite of the Ratzon Hashem. So in practice, it's possible that someone could be acting in this way. And it can go even a step further, that it becomes in a certain sense, a certain ava, in a certain way becoming like an enemy. In other words, he might even do bekavona, intentionally to spite Hashem. So that's one level, and we can still relate to that. But misanecha, to have a hate against the Eibishter, a deep-seated hate that's expressing itself in a constant idea of redifa, of running, of pursuing, in this state of hate, this is very, very difficult to understand. How is that possible? In fact, says the Rebbe, and this answers also one of our questions, this is why Rashi uses the term Misha Amar V'Hoya Ha'olam, the one who created the world. This is in order to emphasize how really it's not even fitting, it doesn't even make sense that someone should have such a type of hate to Hashem. Because Hashem is the one that Misha Amar V'Hoya Ha'olam, with his words, he created the world. And therefore, how is it possible for someone to have such a hate against the one who created him and is giving him his chayis? We're speaking about someone that believes in Hashem, clearly. If he's the enemy of Hashem, he hates Hashem, clearly he believes in Hashem. So how can he have such a hate against the one who's creating him and giving him life? And furthermore, if we're speaking about Misha Amar V'Hoya Ha'olam, how is it even possible that a human being should be able to be roidiv, should pursue and chase, so to speak, after Hashem? And this is why Rashi needs to answer, and he says, Misanecha Elu Soyne Yisrael. When we speak about those that hate you, is referring to those that hate the Yidden. That with the word Misanecha, wherever it says, wherever it speaks about someone hating Hashem, automatically it means those that hate the Yidden. That means this type of hate, this pent-up hate, this deep hate for Misha Amar V'Hoya Ha'olam, in fact, is not possible. But those that hate the Yidden, those that have such a tremendous hate to the Yidden, and as Rashi said already, we know that there's a halacha b'yodua she'esav soyne liYaakov, that Esav hates Yaakov. Automatically, they hate the Yidden, they're hating Hashem. And for this, Rashi needs to bring a proof to say that Misanecha Elu Yisrael, Soyne Yisrael, Misanecha means those that hate the Yidden. Rashi needs to bring a proof from this, and that's why he says Shenamar. Shenamar Misanecha Nosu Rosh, those that hate you lifted their heads. Umihem, and who is this referring to? Rashi says. So the pasuk tells us, Al Amcha Yarimusai, those that are plotting against the Yidden. So here we see clearly that who is considered Misanecho, who are these people that can be considered those that hate Hashem? It's going to be those that are plotting against the Yidden. Says the Rebbe now will also understand the reason for the differences between our Rashi here and the Rashi in Oz Yosher and Taharis Kamecha. In Taharis Kamecha, Rashi is not coming to tell us that the word Kamecha, standing up against Hashem, rising against Hashem, will automatically always mean those that stand up against the Yidden. Because I said before, it is possible that someone should stand up against Hashem, or to be the Oyev, the enemy of Hashem, even by not standing up against the Yidden. As we said, if you're acting against Hashem, you're doing an Aveira against Hashem, that's in a certain sense standing up against Hashem. And therefore Rashi can't just say simply as in our pasuk, Kamecha elu hakamim al Yisrael, these are the ones that get up against the Yidden. Because it's possible, Kamecha, even if you're not standing up against the Yidden. Rather, Rashi wants to explain Kamecha in that particular pasuk in Shiras Hayam, where Yidden are thanking Hashem for Markavos, Paroi, V'chelo, Yoravayom, for sinking the wagons of Paroi and his army, etc. So Rashi is saying, who is the pasuk referring to over here as Kamecha? Rashi explains, Kamech al Yisrael, those that stood up against the Yidden. And that's why Rashi elaborates in his wording, and he says, Hakamim negdecha, those that stand up against you. And he says, Mihem, who are these people that stand up against Hashem? Who could the pasuk possibly mean? This is referring to those that get up against the Yidden. And then Rashi says, where do we find that those that stand up against the Yidden are in the category of standing up against Hashem? So Rashi brings an example. He says, V'chein hu oimer, so too we have another pasuk, that the enemies are making all of this trouble, etc. What's the commotion? What's the trouble? Al amcha yarimusai, because they're plotting against the Yidden, and that's why they are called the enemies of Hashem. So what do we see from there? We see that this type of action of al amcha yarimusai is because of acting in this way, they can be considered, because they're acting against the Yidden, they can be considered the enemies of Hashem. So that's all back in Oz Yosher. Whereas in our parsha, where Rashi is trying to prove that misanecha will always mean those that hate the Yidden, and that's why as Rashi says, Elu soyni Yisrael. So for this Rashi needs to bring a proof. And Rashi says, misanecha nasu roish umihein. Who are they? Who is the person that can be called misanecha? It's halamcha yarimusai, those that plot against the Yidden. The Rebbe now moves on to the Yeina Shel Torah in Rashi, to the Chassidus within the Rashi. And the Rebbe says, similar to this pasuk, Kumo Hashem v'yafutzu oivecha, v'yanusu misanecha miponecha, there's also a pasuk in Tehillim, a very similar pasuk. I should add, although it's not here in the Sicha, but in the unedited version of the Sicha one could see this, that the Rebbe actually said the Sicha back in Tafshin Chavtes. It was this pasuk that we're about to quote was actually the Rebbe's kapitel that year. So the pasuk says, Yakum Elikim, Hashem should rise, Yafutzu Oivav, his enemies should scatter, V'yanusu Misanav Mipanav, and those that hate him should flee from before him. Says the Rebbe, the difference we see over here is that in Chumash it says the word Kumo Havaya, the name Havaya is used. In Tehillim, the term Elikim is used, Yakum Elikim. Says the Rebbe, so all in all, we now have how Hashem is being referred to in connection to this. We actually have three titles, three names. In Chumash, we have the word Havaya. In Tehillim, in Ksuvim, the expression is Elokim. And then in Torah Sheba'al Peh, both in the Sefri and Rashi who quotes it, Hashem is being referred to as Misha Amar V'hoya Ha'olam. Says the Rebbe, we could explain the inner reason. We can explain the reason for this is, so let's first understand something else. The Rebbe says, the inner reason why the pasuk says over here, V'yafutzu oivecha, and misanecha, why are we referring to the goyim over here as the enemies of Hashem, those that hate Hashem? Why is that relevant? Why is that important in our pasuk? Is because we're actually speaking about a situation where there's something lacking in the avodah of the Yidden. The Yidden are not acting in the most perfect way. As Rashi hints to this in his Pirush on Vayehi ben Soya Aron, that this few psukim of Vayehi ben Soya Aron is being written over here in order to make an interruption between between one set of trouble that happens before and another Puranius, more bad things that happen with Yidden afterwards. We want to make a little bit of an interruption, a separation. So this pasuk Kuma Hashem is coming to interrupt or to be mevatel, to get rid of the negativity, the punishments that could come as a result of a lack in the avodah of Bnei Yisrael. And therefore, says the Rebbe, the Yeshua that's going to come now is not so much coming because of the avodah of the Yidden, but rather because these enemies of the Yidden are Hashem's enemies. These people that hate the Yidden are hating Hashem. In other words, if Goyim would see that they could start up Rahman al-Itzlan with Yidden, and Yidden are Hashem's Am Segula, and if Hashem is not helping them Rahman al-Itzlan, then it's a Chilul Hashem, it's a desecration of Hashem's name. The Goyim don't care and they don't think whether the Yidden are perfect in their Torah and mitzvahs or not, Chas v'shalom. All they know is that Yidden are Hashem's children. And therefore, as the Pasuk says, we say, Loilanu Hashem, don't even do it for our sake. Do it for your name. That Hashem's name shouldn't be desecrated amongst the Goyim. Says the Rebbe, and this is what Moshe Rabbeinu is davening, Kumo Havaya V'yofutzu. What does this mean? The Rebbe explains, in order that the enemies should scatter, those that hate you should flee, we needed that it should come out in a very revealed way, the deep connection that Yidden have with Hashem, that absolutely nothing in the world could weaken it. And it's as a result of this tremendous bond, no matter what state a Yid is, so as the expression is that Hashem says, La'achlifam b'uma acheres, eini yochel, I can never change them for another nation. Because then, this is when we see clearly, that's when it's standing in a revealed way, that those that hate the Yidden are misanecha, they hate Hashem, because Yidden and Hashem are all one. And therefore, once this comes out, so v'yafutzu oivecha and v'yonusu misanecha. How is this achieved? So the Pasuk says, Kumo Havaya. So we have the level of Havaya. Shem Havaya is usually associated with a level that's to do with the creation of the world. Kumo Havaya, rise Hashem, means that there's an aliyah within Shem Havaya going up to that which is higher than the Seder Ishtalshalus. And higher than Seder Ishtalshalus, it's not about the avodah of Yidden, but rather v'oya v'syakim, that no matter what, even if there seems to be that the Yidden are not perfect, Hashem has this absolute essential love, dafka for the Yidden. Now, in order for the Yeshua to practically happen as a result of this, that there should be v'yafutzu oivecha v'yunusum misanecha, as Yidden are down here in the world, so that we need to have that this kumo havaya, this level of havaya that's being lifted up, so to speak. Now we're going to a higher level, even higher than Seder Ishtalshel, is a place where Hashem's love is in the greatest way to the Yidden. We need that this should be brought down into our world, even into the concealment of our world, that it should be expressed down here in the lowest place. So the Rebbe says, now we can understand the order of these three descriptions of how we're referring to Hashem. In Chumash, which is the main inyan of Torah Shebeksav, there we have shining the shoyrish, the root, the highest level, and the way everything is hinted in its highest form. And therefore over here we speak about, as just mentioned, Kumo Havaya. The level of Havaya, we're rising to Kumo, that's rising to a level higher than Shem Havaya, and that's going to end up having the result of Yafutzu Oivecha. Then we move to Tehillim and Ksuvim, where the inyanim of Torah are being drawn down a little bit lower, but it's still part of Torah Shebeksav. So now we have the name Elokim, Yakum Elokim, meaning to say that this level that was in Kumo Havaya should be drawn down also into Shem Elokim, and therefore Shem Elokim is also elevated, so to speak, Yakum Elokim. The name Elokim, even though of course it's one of Hashem's holy names, but it's already being said B'Lashon Rabim, it's already the source for the concealment of the world. So this is one step down. And then in Torah Sheba'al Peh, which is where Torah is being drawn down in a way that the recipient, the Yidden, should really be able to grasp it. Here the expression is, Misha Omar V'hoya Olam. Here we're speaking already about our Olam. We're speaking about someone that's found inside of our world, and the word Olam is from the word concealment, Helim. But it's in a place where we know that Sha'amar V'hoya Olam, that Hashem is the one that spoke and the world came in existence. But it's still in a way of Misha Omar. We're saying the one who created. In other words, there's still some sort of concealment over here. We're saying it in a way of like, who is it? And this concealed being, Hashem, is V'hoya Ha'olam. But by the fact that into the Helam Ha'olam, into this place of concealment, is Nimshach, is drawn down this level of Kuma Havaya, this is what brings about practically that Yafutzu Eivecha V'yonusu Misanecha. The Rebbe concludes and says, since We need to make sure that there shouldn't be any of this trouble with Oivecha Misanecha, because this is something that affects and touches Hashem's great name. So Hashem does not take into consideration any of the calculations, not even the cheshbon, the fact that you didn't have to do tshuva first. Rather, Hashem brings immediately the Geula HaMitis V'Ashleima, the Mashiach Tzidkeinu, B'Meheira V'Yameinu Mamash.